Kia ora everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Renee and I'm going to attempt to do 3 months worth of reading wrap-ups. I feel like I've been putting off this video, well, basically since July, and it's not getting any easier, so I just need to hurry up, get it over and done with, and not think about it again. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to do this relatively quickly because we have 17 books that I need to talk about. It's quite a lot. So let's just get straight into it. So the first book that I read in July was Felicity by Mary Oliver. Poetry collection, poems about love in many different forms, very playful, almost quite childlike. I had a good time with this. My first Mary Oliver, will not be my last. A lot of people recommended Devotions as a good next collection to try of Mary Oliver's. I read some of these poems out loud to myself and also to Rupert. It felt fun. It didn't feel too silly. The next book that I read was Small Bodies of Water by Mingya Powles. One of my favourite books that I've read so far this year, hands down. Is a really thoughtful and quiet and mature collection of essays that kind of tell the story of Nina's life. She is a Malaysian New Zealander who was born in Shanghai, spent much of her childhood and growing up in Wellington, New Zealand, and now lives in London. So this whole collection kind of is her exploring ideas around identity and belonging and what these different places evoke when it comes to the memories that she has tied to those places. One of my favourite essays was where she talks about the kowhai tree, which is this beautiful bright yellow leafed tree. It's native to New Zealand, and how she was stunned when she saw one in London, and just how much it made her feel at home. Yeah, just really beautiful writing because she's a poet, so everything is quite considered and respectful, and it was one of my favourite because of how, yeah, respectful she is of everything that she writes about and the way that she kind of honours everything that's come before her. Absolutely am not doing it justice in how I'm talking about it now, but please, 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 if you can, if you ever get the opportunity to read this book, do. It is, yeah, so beautiful, so well written, just gorgeous. Next I read Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker. This was quite a strange book that left me reeling in a way. It's one of the most interior books that I've ever read. Very unique style of narration. It follows this character, Cassandra, who is traveling back home to be at her sister's wedding. Much of the book is inside Cassandra's own mind, and she spends much of the book trying to convince herself and the reader that she's completely fine with this wedding going ahead when it's very clear and very obvious. You can tell she's not happy about it. She does not want anyone to know that that's truly how she feels. She's an interesting character, very narcissistic, very depressed and unhappy, and yeah, I won't say that I enjoyed reading or being in her mind for much of the book. There is a small portion of it where you hear from her twin sister's perspective, which is a nice kind of breath to take in the middle. You dive back into Cassandra's brain again. Yeah, I just thought it was okay. It's a book where not a lot happens, and it is mostly just Cassandra's kind of paranoid obsessive and unreliable thoughts. Very unreliable narrator. Okay, next I read Autobiography of Red by Anke Carson, and I loved this story. I'm not well versed in any kind of Greek myth or studies, but I really don't feel like you have to be in order to appreciate this book. It has some of the most stunning writing and conjures up so many beautiful scenes and imagery throughout the story, and even just the way that the words are placed next to each other and how they kind of sound when you say them out loud. Again, it's like a story told in verse, so it's very poetic and prosy, and yeah, it's just such a sweet story as well. We follow a red-winged monster named Geryon. It's really like a coming-of-age story, a love story. We follow much of his life from a young age through to becoming a young man. There is just something about him and his kind of sweet naivety that you can't help but love, and just how he sees and experiences and takes on the world, and the way he views art as well. I don't necessarily understand any of the Greek references that it's making, or even know the story that it's taking its inspiration from, but I don't think that matters. I think you can enjoy it on a story and character based level, and also just for the beautiful language. Next I read Surviving Marmite by Anisa MacLean. Anisa contacted me through Instagram and asked if I would like her to send me a copy of her book to read, and I don't normally say yes to these kind of cold contact DMs, mostly because those books tend to be ones that I know that I'm not going to be interested in. But Anisa's really kind of caught my attention. It's set in Timaru in New Zealand, and it's a bit of a unique story. It's her family, so it's her memoir. It's the story of her family who immigrated from Iran to New Zealand, to rural New Zealand, and kind of their humorous and joyful way of seeing the world and taking on that new experience. I'm really grateful to Anisa for sending me her book, so thank you, Anisa. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed it. Next I read Greta and Valdon by Rebecca K. Reilly. This is another book set in New Zealand, matter of fact set in Auckland. I did a reading vlog on this book, so I won't talk too much about it if you want to go watch that and hear more about how I found this book. In short, I really enjoyed it. It was great to read something set in a familiar place. It follows two characters. It's narrated chapter on and chapter off by these narrators, a brother and sister, Greta and Valdon, and it's the story of their eccentric Māori, Catalan, Russian extended family. It again has a lot of humour to it, and just a really heartfelt kind of story about family and obligation and identity, and yeah, I just had a really good time reading this. The last book that I read in July was High Ground by Anke Stelling. I read this as part of Katie James's book club, the first installment. I low-key snaked my way in there. Thank you, Katie, for letting me join. I've already mentioned her book club in a few vlogs, and yeah, it's just so much good fun. As for this book, it was a bit of a difficult one. It's one of those books that it's like it wasn't necessarily enjoyable to read, but that kind of felt like the point. You appreciated writers' tenacity and kind of stamina to keep that same kind of tone throughout. The book is narrated by a writer named Reilly. She is the mother of 4 children and a wife. The book is being written as a letter to her young daughter, as almost like a warning She's trying to prepare her daughter for life, basically. She is raging about the fact that there are all these lessons in life or things she felt like she should have known that were never taught to her, or like she was never explained these things to. So she holds a lot of kind of resentment towards her own mother and the world in general for the lot she's ended up with in life. It's also come out that she has written a story about her friends, kind of about this difference and how there is some massive kind of class differences between her and her groups of friends, and kind of realizing that as an adult and talking about it, bringing it up, but also making it extremely public to the point of publishing it. Her friends are not happy at all, and one of her friends happens to be her landlord and is kicking them out of the house. A really interesting kind of book about different social politics and the hardships of like being an adult and being a parent and choosing those things for yourself and being judged for those things, but also being judged for the things that you have no control over, i.e. where you were brought up, like the family that you were born into, how much money they have, that kind of thing. Yeah, lots of really interesting discussion points. This character just has like one tone the whole book, and it's pissed off, and you don't get a break from that at all. Now we're in August. August was a very slow reading month. We got Mars, and I pretty much went into a reading slump because of that. Yeah, I only read 2 books in August. The first one was Trust by Hernan Diaz. I read this as a buddy read with Karen from Karen Reader. I know she talked about it in her wrap up, and we have kind of similar, it was okay, thoughts about this book. I really wanted to love it because I know a lot of other people did, but there were just certain parts of it that just didn't quite make sense to me, or just felt a little bit dragged out or unnecessary. Trust is a novel that is made up of 4 different parts, and those 4 different parts are retellings of the same story in different forms. So the first part you have is a fictional novel written about this Wall Street tycoon, and written from the perspective of someone who didn't have permission to tell the story and is going off a lot of socialite gossip. The second part is the draft of an autobiography that is written from the perspective of the real life man that the story is based on. Andrew Bevel is the man that is at the heart of the fictional story, the Wall Street tycoon. The second part is him wanting to tell his own story, take control of that situation, really present himself in the way that he wants to come across. The third part is the perspective of a woman that works for him during time. She actually ghostwrote his autobiography. So we're hearing from her perspective of kind of what was going on as this autobiography was being written. And the last part is the journals from this man's wife who suffers from mental health issues. Love the idea. It's a book that is questioning itself and fiction and what is even true, and can anything that you read be trusted, whether it be labelled as non-fiction. I just think there were certain sections that maybe could have done with, I don't know, a bit of lift. The first part was very swift to read through, and then felt like the second and third part definitely kind of dragged out a bit. And then the last book that I read in August was Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, another Katie James book club pick. That word was for Women in Translation Month. It was so good. Quite an intense book and hard to describe what it is about. Book opens with a group of children stumbling across the body of a woman, a witch, in this village in Mexico. That discovery is what propels the rest of the story forward as we hear from different characters throughout this village. And this is really all about the writing and the translation. It's so distinct and unique, and it definitely makes you feel extremely uncomfortable. The story and the the way it plays out is extremely violent. It's brutal and unrelenting. It's just literally walls of text on every page. There are no breaks. It's a very gossipy, almost, yeah, that whole village gossip style to it. The language is so harsh and so just what it is. It doesn't try to be anything else other than a really honest portrayal of what life is like in this part of the world for some people. So that was August. We're up to September. We made it. Okay, I'm going to try and speed through these because I've got quite a few. Okay, first up I listened to I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is obviously like the buzz book of the season. Everyone was reading it. It sold out like immediately. I listened to it on Scribd. Really good book to listen to on audio. It's narrated by the author herself, and she just delivers it in such like a deadpan, dark, humorous way. That was perfect. I don't really know much about her before this. I'm not like a Disney kid. I didn't grow up watching Disney or anything, or like iCarly, but she's a child actress, most famous for her role as like the quirky best friend sidekick in iCarly. This memoir is really her story about being forced into child acting and the abuse that she suffered, abuse and manipulation she suffered at the hands of her mother, and the complicated relationship that is involved in being abused in that way when it's your mum, and how that affects you long term. I thought that she delivered her own story really well. I feel as though, like I said, the humour and the way that she chose to look back and remember certain moments in her over her childhood and being in those moments rather than looking at it as an adult was really interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I would recommend reading it or listening to it, or a lot of people already have, and a lot of people have had other more articulate words to say about it. Next up I read Slow Days, Fast Company by Babitz, my first Babitz. I really loved this one. This is a memoir, but it reads like fiction. It's one of those books that I was confused the whole way through. I was like, is this actually her life or is she making this up? Either way, it's a very entertaining book. Reads a bit like a love letter to LA and the atmosphere of it and the feeling you get. It was just a really fun way to catch a glimpse into a type of LA that I don't know if it still exists. It really filled the gap or scratched an itch that I had for that young party girls going out, living their life, being a bit tragic type stories that I've read recently over the years and been extremely disappointed in. This one does it, but it does it so good, and in a way that doesn't leave you hating the characters or feeling as though they're extremely shallow. It was just the right ticket for if you're looking for that kind of story. I also did a reading vlog on this book, so if you want to go hear thoughts about that, although I probably just shared them all, you can go do that. Okay, the next 3 books I'm going to talk about very quickly because I also have a reading vlog. I did so many reading vlogs this month. First up, Dogs of Summer. I did Julie's Blurb Telephone. This was the book that I picked. I also wanted to read it because it was the Sunny's book club pick for September as well. I'm hitting up all the book clubs. That was the first one that I read for the Blurb Telephone. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I'm totally like into child narrators right now. But Dogs of Summer is a translated piece of fiction from the Spanish. It follows 2 young girls who are living on the Canary Islands, and it is a story about childhood, girlhood, growing up, discovering all kinds of things over a summer, getting up to mischief. It's about like intense, close, intimate bonds and friendships. It just has this really interesting sense of everything feeling quite exciting and not knowing what's going to happen, and there's this real kind of frenzied energy to the book. Loved it. Next I read Indelicacy by Amina Cain. I don't really have anything to say about this book. I talk about it in the vlog. I just thought it was okay. I don't even particularly even think that the writing was very good. Like, nothing blew me away, nothing was memorable. It's a story about a woman who, cleaner at a museum, she so desperately wants to become a writer and write all day. She marries a man and is from then has the means to become a writer, and she slowly just realizes that perhaps having this ability to do that doesn't necessarily mean she'd be happy. So yeah, it's just I wasn't impressed. I didn't think it was anything to write home about. Okay, the last book that I read in the Blurb Telephone challenge was An Apprenticeship or The Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector. Absolutely love this book. It's kind of like a love story, but like very existential. I really think that Clarice Lispector is like a genius and has some of the most profound and like world-breaking lines of literature that I've ever read. I will read whatever she writes and allow it to kind of destroy me and then put me back together. It's about love. It's about discovering who you are as a person. It's about connection and how we can relate to other people. The experiences, both scary and exciting, that they can expose us to. How we can become blinded by those feelings as well. Yeah, if you want to question everything about life, definitely read this book. Okay, next book I read was Paradise Rot by Jennette. Another book that I absolutely love. I have never read something quite as atmospheric as this one. You definitely feel like you're in this kind of dank, damp, wet, alive warehouse. So we're following this character, Jo. She is a student who has just recently moved country to go to university and has moved into a converted apartment from an old warehouse with this girl, and in this space everything is intensified for Jo. Sounds echo everywhere. There is no sense of like privacy or anything about yourself that isn't going to be exposed to this other person. This whole book just felt like it was pulsing and alive. Really, really enjoyed this one. Next one I read was Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. This was another great little tiny book that I absolutely loved. A story about immigration, about journey, about life and death and the underworld and what happens to people on that journey. We are following a young woman, Makina, who has been given the task of traveling from Mexico across the border to the United States to deliver a message to her brother. This book is that journey. She is such a staunch, fierce narrator and I absolutely loved her. I thought she was so badass and so confident in who she is, what she knows as a person, and it was so good to read a young character like that. I just absolutely loved it. Last book. The last book that I read in September was Blessed the Daughter Raised by a Voice in Her Head by Warsan, Shire. Kia ora, just popping in here to make a correction. Aroha mai to Warsan for mispronouncing her last name. It's Warsan Shida, and ngamahi to Ben Green for using the proper pronunciation and making me aware of that. Okay, back to the wrap up. Again, this was the Katie James September Book Club pick. Beautiful collection of poetry. Absolutely loved it. Warsan Shire is a Somali poet who was born in Nairobi, lives in London. There's this really interesting cross-section of cultures there, obviously, and lots of references to those different worlds and how they come together in this one person. It's felt like a really honest, vulnerable, and just true depiction of what a person might look like growing up in those two very different worlds. It's a lot about assimilation, a lot about the body, religion in there, and then just really beautiful, vivid, stunning language. Yeah, the discussion for this one was so good. Probably my favourite so far. Poetry is like not something that I am like all that comfortable with, so being able to read it in a group of like smart, intelligent, wonderful people was just like, I felt, how did I get so lucky? But yeah, it's a great collection. Thank you to Katie for putting it on our radar and making us read it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you honestly made it this far, you deserve $500. Let me know if you have read any of these books. What's been your favorite read in the last few months? Let me know how you've been, what everyone's been reading, what everyone's been up to. I appreciate you all and thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Ka kite.